going to do kind of like a ad lib explanation how I got this. This is a sub panel. If I look kind of exhausted, it's because I am overworked with way too much do-it-yourself work lately, including going up into the attic and running wire and installing a mini split in the house in Florida in the summer. Okay, so I'm going to explain how I installed this mini split. I'm not a licensed electrician, and so it's advisable to consult with a licensed electrician and let them do the work, but I'm just going to show you how I did it. Again, my puppy is not licensed, but she installed this anyway. Okay, so this was pretty difficult, but I'll try to explain all the tricks and tips that I learned during this install. This one has passed what they call a rough and a final electrical inspection. The rough inspection means you leave the cover off. Well, actually, for both inspections, the cover is off. But a rough inspection is just a first inspection where usually a city inspector, which is required for most cities to put in a sub panel because it is highly advanced electrical work. In this case, in the city of Northport, Florida, I had to get a permit, and it cost about nearly $200 for the two inspections. And the inspector was only here for about 5 minutes each. Okay, so during the first inspection, what they're looking for, so the reason I'm bringing up inspection is because you're going to need to comply with National Electric Code when you do this or when you hire somebody. And what that means is lots of rules on how to put this in. There are a couple different types of sub panels. This one is a larger than average one. Well, let me back up. Why would you need a sub panel? Well, if you're wanting to hook up something like, if your standard 200 amp service like this one is all taken up, then like if you're expanding your house like I've been doing, I've run out of breaker room. And one of the major culprits, which I'm phasing out and getting rid of, is the air conditioner condenser and the air conditioner air handler. The central air conditioner and heating system I am making obsolete by installing mini split air conditioners, which I will make a future video about how that's going. Let me tell you a summary about that. Let me pause the video and show you something. So it's hurricane season. I got lots of stuff here in the lanai back porch. But for related to the sub panel are these disconnect boxes. For each mini split, we'll need a disconnect box. Also has to have this under the same permit. So here's a mini split that I installed myself. This is the second one that I've ever installed, and it's very quiet. And the day I installed this, my central air conditioner system completely failed. And so right now I'm switched over to this one. This is 9,000 BTU at 24 SEER2. SEER2 is the new standard for energy efficiency. It's powering the whole house. I mean, it's cooling the whole house. And it's in my master bedroom, so this is the other side of the lanai. There is the air handler inside. It's cold in here. And I have a fan blowing the air through the rest of the house, the cold air blowing it through the rest of the house. That's a 9,000 BTU mini split, smallest you can get, is cooling the whole house successfully. The technician said the thermostat is defective, and so I'm waiting on a new one. So going back into the garage and get back onto the sub panels. That's one reason for a sub panel is adding different appliances such as mini splits, because typically a 240 volt mini split is going to need a double pole breaker. A double pole breaker typically is needed when you want to go with 240 volts. 240 volts is going to be more efficient, not requiring generally as thick of a cable as 120 volts. Similar in DC application, 12 volt versus 24 volt, 24 volt being more efficient. So I always like 24 volts and 240 volts if possible. And so if you get a 240 volt appliances, they're going to run more efficient. So keep that in mind. Another reason why a sub panel is going to come into play when you're upgrading appliances to more efficient, switching from 120 to 240. And I know what you're thinking. Well, is it 110, 115, or 120? It's all of the above. Is it 220, 225, 230, 240? All of the above. They all mean the same thing. Just different industries have not agreed on exactly the standard. And it also depends on the age of the appliance. Generally today, I think they're generally calling them 120 and 240 each. Okay, so the main panel over here is what you're going to come off of to get to the sub panel. From the main panel, you have two options. You can have a sub panel breaker, in this case 100 amps. 100 amps is the standard for a sub panel. You can get smaller, or I'm not sure if the NEC National Electric Code will allow larger than 100 amps. I don't know about that. Okay, so what is this? This is the generator protection. So when I switch to whole house generation through a generator, this generator here, when the power goes out, this we'll have to switch this completely off. This will fall down and allow me to turn the generator on so I don't backfeed power into the grid, electrocuting workers. That's what that is, in case you're curious. So going back on to over here, at the time that I needed the mini splits, I could have, but it's summer in Florida. I didn't want to completely disable the central air conditioning system, but had I known, I could cool the whole house with just one 15 amp, by the way. 15, that's how efficient that is. 15 amp mini split, which means it doesn't use all of the 15 amps. It has to use less than 15, no greater than 15. Probably I'm estimating 12 amps during full power use. So that one breaker versus taking up two spots over here, if I would have known, I could just pull these two out and put 115 in there and switch from 105 amps for the central system, step down to just 15 amps for one mini split that is currently cooling the whole 2,100 under roof air conditioned space inside the house. That's just incredible. I mean, wow. I am just totally amazed. I'll make a future video about that. So I'm trying to get back to the sub panel and focus on it. That's why you're watching the video mostly. What's this yellow? This is protected to keep your fingers from touching the 240 volt hot terminals on both sides. Hot terminals are generally color coded, just about any color. They're not supposed to be white colored, and so the inspector told me, since I used white cables, because that's what comes with the Romex. These are called Romex or just indoor or outdoor household electrical. Household electrical will generally have solid strand wire. That means just one solid strand instead of multiple strands, because we don't need to flex the household wire as much as, let's say, automotive wire, which is stranded, or extension cables that are stranded. So the solid presumably is more energy efficient than stranded. So anyway, so you can see here I put extra tape, white tape, over these neutral bars so I don't accidentally get the ground touching there. That's another idea that's not required by code, but code does require you, according to my inspector, to put some other color on these white wires when they're used for 240, because in a 240 application the two wires going into the double pole breaker are both going to be 120 volts each to create your 240. That's how that works. And each one of the thicker cable going in, I forgot what gauge that is, each one of those coming into your subpanel service are going to be a hot 120 volt to create 240 into the subpanel. If your subpanel doesn't need 240 volts, I guess technically you could just get one hot wire coming in, but I'm not sure that'll comply with NEC. Okay, so this is a typical 200 amp service. It has been expanded to add another 100 amps. In my opinion, for better efficiency, I would have not put a sub panel breaker there, but rather have I forgot what they're called, a piercing connector directly to the service behind this plate. There's supposedly some way you can pierce a tap right into the service and come through here if the sub panel is close to the main panel. I'm not sure how close they have to be. So other tips about the sub panel and information is inspectors don't like a lot of slack. So I know if you think like I do and you have a lot of experience with electrical where you cut your wires too short and now you're in big trouble and you have to splice them to get them longer. I don't like splicing if I can avoid it. So I had extra slack and they told me to get it out of there and just keep it nice and neat, just what I need. So I don't feel real comfortable with this being so tight like that, but it pleases the inspectors. So here it's pretty loose there, which is actually easier to lengthen if it's too short versus these. But I think it's probably going to be fine for life because there shouldn't be any need to really redo anything in the future there. So some other reasons I expanded is because I wanted to add more receptacles to include installing a hot tub under the Lanai in the future, which now I have the option because I have so much electrical now added into the Lanai. Lanai is it's a Hawaiian term for back porch. So we call it Lanai in Florida. Okay, so the sub panel, you need a ground bar. Mine didn't come with it, so be careful if you have a long drive to the hardware store, be careful that you get all the parts you need. You want to make sure you get the ground bar if it doesn't have one, and also the breakers you need. You can't just use any breakers. They have to be compatible with the sub panel. So in my case, it's Square D home line. So make sure it matches up. I can only use Square D home line breakers, not Square D QC or whatever the other version is they have. There are several different types of breakers. You got the double pole, single pole generally for 120 volts, double for 240. And you want to generally have the double poles lower and distribute each side about equally in amperage usage. So for example, over here you see lots of double pulls on each side at about the equal, at actually the exact same amount on each side, so that each side has an equal distribution of electrical, or approximately equal distribution. Conduit, as far as I can tell, can be metal or plastic. I like plastic because it flexes and you can cut it easier. The inspector is going to want a fastener on the wall within every 3 feet. So you don't want a space of longer than 3 feet between the fasteners. The conduit going to the sub panel should be at least this size. This one is 1 inch. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 wires going through here, and it is tight. So if you're going to use 6 wires, you're going to need 1.5 inches or bigger, probably, of a PVC. And so it's going through the attic. This install may look easy, but it is actually pretty difficult. It's difficult to get everything level. I use a level on here to make sure this is level, so that when you're looking here, this gap is the same width throughout. You don't want some hillbilly looking, East Texas looking shit. So you want it pretty nice and neat. Outside I have a digital meter and 30 amp RV, 30 amp generator. So as you can see, it's that's why my 200 amp ran out of room. I got so much stuff going on. Per National Electric Code, don't mount anything permanently very close. Keep everything at least a foot or two away from the box. This refrigerator is out of code. It's too close to the main panel. It's not supposed to be there, but it can just roll out. So as long as it's not permanent, that's okay. So the inspector was smart enough to know they didn't say anything about that I could just roll that out of the way. But before all this, I had this microwave. This is for guests. I had it mounted kind of close to where this box was, and I went ahead and removed it so they couldn't get me on that, because that would be a permanent installation. You can see the holes right there where it was mounted. The microwave was here, and I needed the sub panel there, so that had to go. Definitely didn't want to mount the sub panel around the microwave. I wanted the sub panel as high priority to be where it should best be. The sub panels come with with all these electrical boxes, you're going to use these lock nuts that you generally use a hammer and a screwdriver to tighten. Electrical code wants you to use conduit glue. A little secret, I'm not saying I did this, but I don't want to permanently glue anything except if it's outside underground or something like that. And so you could just use it like a Q-tip and put a little electric glue around the edge to make it look like you used it all the way through. I don't like doing it permanently glued. I'm not saying I did it, but if I didn't want to, okay, well, anyway, you got the point. To mount these kind of boxes, you will evaluate where are the holes. In this case, there are 4 main mounting holes. In this case, with a Florida house, it's generally going to be concrete, sometimes solid concrete. And so I had to use a hammer drill with a concrete masonry bit to get in there, and then put in here the wall anchor stuff. These are kind of small for a sub panel. Probably use a little bit bigger stuff than that. So it would be more like these anchor bolts here for a sub panel, at least 2 of those. Isn't that right? Let's go through the wiring again. So coming in, I have green for ground, Code doesn't require it to be green, but that will probably make the inspector a little happier. Neutral, and then 2 hots. And those will just correlate to whatever your main panel has. It should have a main connect for neutral, white. Look where your white wires are going. And it should have a main lug where the neutral goes. And then these thick ones are going to go on your sub panel there, or unless you tap into here, which I was told by my inspector does not require shutting off the service from the outside. Just simply shut this one off and you can tap into it somehow. Or no, correction, since this is a 100 amp breaker, you wouldn't, no, 200 amp breaker, you would not tap into the breaker, you would tap into the line behind it, which is, I guess, I don't know how many volts the service line is. If you know, put that in comments. I don't know off the top of my head. I never researched it to find out. Oh, another thing I like to do is to use a label printer and print neatly. Like, for example, since, in my opinion, code should require clear labeling, but they don't, what is on, off, and what each thing is in black and white. Not black on black, which is currently what the manufacturers do, except for you can see 20 there, white on black, barely. But see, there's on, you can't see it because it's black on black, which I think is wrong. One thing I found confusing is that the ground bar looks just like a neutral bar. So be careful. Don't assume one of these is neutral and one of those is ground. Both of them in this case are neutral, and I had to put in my own ground. Generally, these boxes have S2 screws like this. See see how it's square in the middle? So it's going to use a S2 when square 2 size right there bit to take the cover on and off, and also you can use S2 for those for a tighter fit and easier working. But they can also use a flathead screwdriver, not Phillips. But be careful when you're taking the panel on and off. If you take this panel on and off enough times, these strip kind of easy, and because there's not a nut. It's just this fairly thin steel that you're screwing into, and that's not a very thick place to serve as a nut, and they will strip. Oh, what I was supposed to mention from the very beginning is before you even start messing with anything at all, be sure to turn the main breaker completely off. If you're going to do it yourself, the first step is this off, the main breaker, which may be up on top. A lot of them are mounted on top, not the bottom. One thing to be careful with, don't go over the 100 amps. If you have a 100 amp sub panel, don't put over 100 amp total of breakers in there. So 20, 40, 60, 80, 95, I'm maxed out because there's nothing I can do with a 5 amp breaker. I'm at 95 already. There's a box bonding screw, has something to do with a neutral. You'll have to do your own research to find out whether or not you need a box bonding screw. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. I got this done. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave you on your own to find out whether you need a box bonding screw. You're going to have to consult with someone on that one. If your sub panel has more than 6 places for a breaker, that's not the official way to describe it, but slots. So if your sub panel has more than 6 slots, it has to have its own breaker. If it has 6 or less slots, which is going to be the typical one you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's in the store, then it doesn't have to have its own main breaker. When you're running the wire through the attic, you're walking through the attic, beware that this you can't just walk anywhere you want up in the attic. You have to walk on rafters, or else you'll fall right through this. See this white gypsum board? You would end up stepping right through it, possibly falling to the ground. In my case, would be fatal because concrete with 10-foot ceilings. Man, I just spent $8,000 having a new central air system put in, and I've already made it obsolete. See, look. This is a 16 SEER that uses 105 amp circuitry. See, it also has to have its own breaker box. Air conditioner disconnect is what that's called. I don't like the install they did. I don't like the way it kind of runs out like that. It should, ideally this would be installed over here, right there, and it would run down to the ground and up through there without being a gap. I just don't like this. Eventually, I may just have this completely removed and just resell it real cheap used or something. I mean, that's 16 SEER, not even factoring in the inefficiency of the ductwork in the hot attic, versus my 24 SEER 2 ductless. Okay, so back to the sub panel. Sub panels don't have to be mounted this close to the main, but I do recommend doing that if you can. It all depends on how much of a hardship it is for you to get your wiring this close to the main panel. In my case, it was a little bit of a hardship because you see how it had to feed wire through there at the edge of the house, where in the attic you only have a half a foot to work with right there for a good way. And so I had to kind of stretch my arm way in there to get the wire in through the hole. But I didn't want to have I guess I could have had a hole here and then have conduit running across at an angle down. But this looks better there. That's just much more of a dramatic, sharp angle to work with the way I did it here for aesthetics. And probably for reliability too, because if you have conduit right onto the drywall, that's not going to really hold at all. You're going to need a stud behind it, so you need your conduit along with a stud on the ceiling if you do conduit on the ceiling. Oh man, I regret wasting $8,000 on this. It wasn't a waste. I've been using it for 2 years because these only last about 10 years in Florida, but I just don't like it. I mean, actually it works really good, but I just don't trust it. It's going to fail, and it actually did the day I installed a mini split. Incidentally, it has nothing to do with the mini split, why it failed. Okay, so sub panel. Be careful when you're working around here. You see that metal back there? That's hot. So I should probably put tape over that metal back there, which I tried to right there. You see a little bit right there. I got a little bit of metal, a little bit of tape on the metal there where it's more risky for ground wire to hit it. You see this? I don't like this ground wire so close to the hot. I hate that. So I'm probably gonna flip the breaker and then somehow cover that up a little better than that. Yep. Now, one thing I would do different is I would mount a ground bar on both sides, because currently the way this is, for these wires on the right side, I have to strip them back quite a ways so that I have a long copper going to the other side. And the danger of that is you got the copper going across so close to neutral and hot. The ground so close to neutral and hot. I don't like that. So that's one thing I would do different. I'm gonna just leave it the way it is now because it's good, but if I did another one, ground on both sides to prevent bare copper ground going across so close to the hot and neutral. Total cost, the box, it's really not that much for the parts, but if you hire someone, that's probably going to cost significantly more than the parts, especially if they do a professional job like this one is, where it's all nice and really centered really well and straight, this would probably be $1,000 in labor, because it would take an electrician many hours to do this, and especially if they run the wire through the attic. The wiring is probably, yeah, well, it depends on how many feet you need. What are they going for? $1 a foot or something? So the breakers are somewhere around $10 each, and the box is about, this huge box, probably around 150 or less, and the smaller ones can be maybe $80. Conduit's fairly inexpensive. So parts not that much. Labor, yeah, who knows what you're getting there if you hire somebody. One thing I like about DIY, do it yourself, is other than saving money, I know it's done right, and I know how to service it in the future. I don't have to rely on anybody. So I wanted to make the video before I just reassemble the cover back on. You'll have these knockouts. You have to knock out these according to how many breakers you're going to install. If you are like many people and you knock too many out, you're just going to have openings. And like I said, I don't like how easily you can end up touching some of those hot spots over there. Okay, I gave you the best I can, considering I am zonked from being overworked. If you please do all your standard things to help and leave some comments, I will try to respond the best I can. And if you see something you would do different, please let us know.